Hey everyone, it's Helen from S&B Deal Hunter. Today we have Johannes Hock with us, an acquisition entrepreneur who acquired an artificial turf business. Johannes, I'm very excited to hear your story, especially because I actually am a big artificial turf person. I have two dogs. And yeah, great to have you on today. I guess to get started, love to hear your background and how you got into this space.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I have a partner in this. We both come from one of the more common backgrounds for search, which is kind of banking private equity space. We met at the private equity firm we both worked at. We did a lot of family founder-owned businesses at that firm that invested in those. Did some minority deals as well, where we got to go a little bit down market, see more of the middle market space. That's probably more similar to the small business space versus kind of the bigger deals. And then also did a good amount of work in the home service and a little bit of consumer space. So when we set out to look for a business that would fit for us, we were focused on Texas. That was where the firm was, where we were. I went to college here. My partner's from Texas. So I think it always helps to look close to either where you're from or where you have a good amount of connections. It just helps building a relationship with sellers and them taking you more serious. And so focused on Texas is generally a good space with good demographic and economic trends. And then the focus industry wise, we were pretty agnostic, but certainly home service is definitely a space that I think lends itself well, as most people know, for kind of the self funded search route. So started that, started looking, kind of quit our job, started looking in 2021. We had a relatively quick search. We got under LOI with the business we eventually ended up buying in 6 weeks. But then it took almost 5 months to close it because we needed tax returns to get the deal across the line. And then, bought an artificial turf business. At that point, it was just in Dallas, and started expanding from there in early 2022.
Wow, very, very exciting. I'm curious when you started, when you quit your job, gotten under LOI in 6 weeks, what happened? What were you doing in those 6 weeks? Where were you looking for deals? Was it on market, off market, just, businesses business owners you knew in the community, or how did you approach these businesses?
Yeah, so I think the common way that most people go about it is you start with what's on the market, right? That's kind of more actionable. It's you have more information. Yes, it's obviously a little bit more competitive, and I think the space, frankly, has changed quite a bit in the last 3 years or so. It's definitely gotten a lot more crowded and more competitive. So who knows if it's still the right approach, but I still think when you're starting to search, looking at what's on the market is the first place you should go. And then we always had the plan of eventually adding proprietary search to that and reaching out directly to business owners, but ended up kind of closing a deal before we ever got to that stage. So can't speak to that sourcing channel as much. But I think a big piece that was helpful in terms of getting to a deal quickly was doing all the preparation work before officially searching. And so I think a lot of people waste time and go, I'm going to start searching for a business, and they waste the first 6 months in getting a website ready and coming up with an industry thesis and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's a pretty big waste of time. Like, you should be able to prepare that and start that before quitting your job, especially if you're doing, the self-funded route. It's like the second you start searching, the clock starts ticking and your bank account balance only goes one way, which is down. So, it can be pretty nerve wracking. So, you should really start like 100% of your time the second you start officially searching on sourcing deals, evaluating deals, submitting offers. And so for us, the day that we actually started searching, we had everything set up, and it was really about, let's go through everything that's on the market right now. And, that's probably 100 deals or so. Majority of those are never going to be a fit, but I think we probably submitted a similar amount of IOIs and LOIs and offers that other people do over the search period. We just really consolidated it into the first 2 months or so. So it's not a matter of like we had better deal flow than anybody else or anything like that. It was just a matter of speeding up. Instead of submitting 20 IOIs over 2 years. We did the same thing over 2 months.
Wow, amazing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the prep work you guys did do while you were still, working in a job?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another part that I think people overthink sometimes. They spend tons of time figuring out what the right CRM is, and what do I need these business cards? Do I need this teaser? It really doesn't matter that much. Like, I think what matters is when a seller or a broker gets an email from you, um, they don't know how serious to take you, right? There's a lot of tire kickers in the space. They get outbound or inbound traffic all the time, and so I think all you need is to look serious enough for them to send you information on the deal. And so I think it's helpful to have a small little website that says, "Hey, I'm a searcher. I'm looking for this and this business. Here's my background. Here's why you should take me serious." You should have an email, I think, that doesn't say at gmail.com, because then it looks like you just woke up on a Saturday afternoon and you're like, well, maybe I buy a painting business or something like that. And so it's just a little bit of like, you know, website, maybe a one pager on like, this is who we are, because it's easy to attach to an email. And then just have like a designated email. It doesn't need to be a full-fledged, like, this is my fund and my advisors, and like, don't pretend to be something that you're not. But it just shows if you have, at least a website, a teaser, a signature line in your email and designated email, well, you've at least put some time into it, and you just want to avoid giving sellers and brokers a reason to exclude you from a process. So that's pretty much all we did, kind of leading up to it. I think all of that you can do in 4 weeks. It's not a ton of like prep time that you need. It's not take you 500 hours to get all that up and running. It's probably 50 to 100. And you can be in a good position to where the second you start searching, you're ready to really spend 95-100% of your time looking at deals.
No, that makes sense. I definitely agree. A lot of people overthink it and, spend 6 months just trying to get a website up. And I guess that kind of makes those people tire kickers in many ways, right? So I'm curious with, you mentioned you guys were pretty industry agnostic. What were some examples of deals you guys looked at, other than, I guess, the business you guys went under LOI and acquired?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a whole range. I mean, we looked at a mountain bike, e-bike refitting business. So like they provided kits to add like electric motors to existing mountain bikes. We looked at I think we had some really exotic ones. We had one that was life insurance, like settlement business, where they would buy the insurances off of terminally ill clients, and give them early payouts. There's one that that was an interesting one. They would offer, if you have good credit, they would offer to add you as an authorized user, which then improves your credit score. So and it was essentially a platform, as a marketplace where people with good credit could offer that their service essentially, and then people that needed their credit repaired, like a bunch of really exotic stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm picking the ones that are more interesting and more exotic. We saw a ton of landscape, a ton of HVAC, and just like the regular old businesses that were probably much more down the fairway. But I think in general, the whole like trying to fixate on an industry is a pretty big waste of time. Like, most likely, with the size requirements that most folks have and the geographic focus, you're not going to be able to like really pick an industry on top of those two. Like I always say, out of industry, location, and size, you get to pick 2 out of 3. You don't get to pick 3 and say, I'm going to buy $1 million HVAC business in LA. You won't. Like, you might as well not search. There's going to be maybe 20 of those, and like 10 of those have already sold, 5 of them won't sell, and the other 3, you're not going to be price competitive. Like, you just wasted a month doing research on that space.
I
So
totally agree.
that's the big thing in my mind. It's just like, you got to be open. You got to look at this more as like, is this a good business? Is there a reason why this business makes money? Is there a reason why it's going to continue to make money? And then what the actual thing is, like what the actual business does to make money, that you can assess that secondarily. You got to be flexible there.
No, I totally agree there. I'm curious, what were you guys kind of looking for, that you determined made, something a good business, regardless of industry? What were some of the things that you were kind of filtering for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's most people have like the same metrics there, right? It's like historic, like history of profitability, recurring revenue, no customer concentration, no vendor concentration. I remember like I got that list, which I mean, you'll come across eventually if you get into this space. It's not an official list, but like if you ask people like what you should be looking for, like eventually you get to like the same six, seven, eight metrics. And I remember I like at the very early stages as we were like exploring this avenue, I talked to one of my old business school professors and I was like, hey, I know you're involved in the small business community. This is kind of what I'm looking for. What do you think? And he's like, good luck finding a unicorn. Like that just doesn't exist, right? Like if you have a business, you always have to think about a little bit like if you own this business, why would you sell it? If you have a business that has a management in place, like healthy margins, history of profitability, and no concentration, it's like that's a money printer. You're never gonna sell that. Like that business will not come to market, and it sure shit won't come to market for like 3 to 5 times. Like maybe they'll sell it if someone just like crazily overpays and pays you 15 times. Like sure, at some point, anything's for sale. But that's not a deal that as a searcher you're going to come across. So the first thing I think for people, or the first thing that people have to like be conscious of is like there is going to be hair on your deal in some way, form, or fashion. Like if you're buying something that's sub 10 million of revenue, you're going to have a wrinkle somewhere. You're going to have project based revenue. You're going to have one big customer. You're going to have I mean, a lot of these businesses have employee concentration. That's something that isn't talked about a lot. But if you have a business that has 10 employees, like that is real concentration. If two of these people leave, like you have a real problem. And so I think the
Yep.
big thing that we looked for was we wanted to have industry tailwinds. We were willing to sacrifice revenue quality and go to a non-recurring revenue business in return for having a better employee base, more tailwinds, and just almost a little bit of like a hustle business where I think in a lot of the project based businesses you can get involved, you can roll your sleeves up, and you can have a chance at making a difference even not being from the industry. But yeah, I think the general ones, the general metrics is the same that everyone looks for, right? Growing revenue, history of profitability, limited concentration, I think, are the big ones. But then you're probably not going to get all of them similar to the industry geography and size metrics.
It's probably like the getting 2 out of 3 when it comes to industry size and geography. It's kind of the same thing with the rest of the list. So,
Yep.
um, I'm curious, with artificial turf specifically, let's talk about that. What did you like about it when you first sort of found the business, and also now that you've run the business for a while, obviously you know a lot more. What do you like about the industry? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what made it interesting to us, didn't have any background in it, but I think what was surprising the first time we came across it was how highly reviewed the industry was. So, you see most home service businesses, it's like if they're at a 4.1, 4.2 on Google, they're probably doing a pretty good job. If you see a 4.5, they're really putting in effort. Um, we looked at artificial turf and it's like everyone's like a 4.7 to a 5.0. It's like, well, that's
Wow.
interesting because it's definitely not a different, labor pool. It's not that we have that every artificial turf business just has like the absolute best installers. So the product must be good, right? There must be something where inherently the product makes the customers really happy. And so that was the first kind of call out for us. The second one was obviously, we like the Dallas metro area a lot, just the underlying trend of population growth there, business friendly environment. And then I think the third one was just the adoption curve we saw. So turf at that point was still relatively new to Dallas and Texas, not as much obviously anymore, but even at the point we bought it, we were kind of like at the inflection point. And so you could look at markets where turf had been around a little bit longer, especially on the West Coast, and you could kind of look into the future a little bit. And so I think the part where we made a big bet was most people looked at this business and it looked like hockey stick growth. And I would say at least 80% of people were saying this is a COVID bump, right? People are stuck at home. They're just doing their backyard right now. And the second people can travel again, nobody's going to do turf anymore. And so I think that's where we were willing to, I always talk about you have to figure out revenue predictability versus like recurring revenue necessarily, right? Like all that matters is what revenue am I going to do next year? And of course, if I start the year out with zero on a project-based business, I have to dig a lot deeper and make a lot more assumption than if I just have 3 years of contracts. But that's, I think, the piece where we really dug deep on diligence and essentially got comfortable with, we think this is a long-term trend and we're early on in an adoption curve. And we're willing to make that bet. And obviously that panned out really well. The business has tripled over 2 years, just from the demand growth in the area. I think today the market looks a lot different. I think it's now a much more mature market in a lot of the older markets. And so that's why we started expanding with new locations, across the Southeast and the South in general. And then we're looking at buying established players in kind of the more mature markets is the strategy that we're pursuing now. I think what's helpful for other searchers is like when you're looking at project-based businesses, so all of home improvement, windows, doors, siding, fencing, roofing, I think timing is a lot more important than people give it credit for. Like I think right now, pool industry is a good example. The pool industry went from, kind of steady state 18, 19, 20 to completely through the roof in 21, 22. And then, people kind of worked through backlog in 23, and right now there's a lot of pain in the pool industry. And so you'll see more and more pool business come to market, and someone might say, well, it's just we just haven't done a lot in ads and like that kind of thing, but you can easily turn it around, and people will look at it and might fall for that. I think that's something that people have to really, really pay attention. Is like pools get financed a lot, rates are higher. Like, what's the actual demand profile they're like? And so I think that's just like something for people to look out for when they assess deals that are not recurring revenue. It's like you can't just assume that, oh well, it's done between 3 and 5 million of revenue the last couple of years. It'll land somewhere in between there. That's just not the case.
No, that's great advice. And I'm curious, I guess, underlyingly with artificial turf businesses, what is the reason people are adopting it so quickly? Is it
Yeah.
homes, people with pets like me who are, like our backyard is all turfed, because my dogs are a mess when they come in and it just simplifies things, right? Is it people like me? Is it people, what are the main reasons people choose turf?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. You're like the stereotypical customer for us, right? It's most of the time people don't start out with I want turf. It's usually like, oh, I want a big yard, I want a house, a backyard for the kids, for the pets, and then they try to get their grass to grow and it doesn't, and there's shade, and it's especially in the South, it's like it gets hot, it gets cold, the grass dies, and then they resod it once or twice, and eventually they're just like, I just want to be able to use my backyard. And that's kind of where we come into play. It's really a solution buy. It drains faster, you can use your backyard the whole year. The pets can go in and out. You don't have to, like, it rains once and then you have to have the towels by the back door because the dog's dragging the mutt and all that stuff. And frankly, it's the product has developed a lot. Like the vast majority of people have never seen the current like landscape and pet turf that we offer. Like people mostly know maybe a football field or sports turf. But it's not surprising that the current generation product didn't come out until like 2010, 20 like 15 or so. And so it's not, unless you have like a neighbor that has it and got something recently installed, you probably, like, most people haven't seen it. And so it's actually a product that looks a lot more natural, a lot more, you have multicolored blades. It's you have thatch in it, which is kind of like resembling the dead grass. And so it's a lot of features that are meant for aesthetic versus, obviously in sports turf, it's all for, cleats and obviously athletic use. And so I think as people look for solutions to use their backyard and then get to see the like what's currently what the current state of the market and state of the art products are, that becomes a really good fit. And so I think that's why the reviews are so high. It's just a pretty like ideal product market fit for that application of I have dogs, I have pets. Maybe you travel a bunch, right? And it's like, well, now all of a sudden you're gone for a week, the backyard's a mess again, and it just that the convenience and the usability is really what drives the appeal.
No, that's super interesting to know I am the target demo.
Yep.
I'm curious, going back to when you were, kind of pre-acquisition, how did you guys finance the deal? Was it SBA? Like, how did you mentioned self-funded search, and that it took you 5 months to kind of close the deal. What did you guys focus on during diligence, or was financing what was holding you back?
Yeah, so we went the SBA route, and then we had a couple outside investors for which kind of common for self funded deals. We're actually now switched to the other side where we've invested in quite a few other searchers, like very similar to what you're doing. The only holdup was really that the business was growing so quickly, and so the issue was that with the 2020 numbers, the deal wouldn't have penciled for the bank. And so we were like, look, this is a very different business today than it was, and this was like as of October 2021. Can we do the underwriting based off of a Q of E for last 12 months, October 21, with the foresight of like assuming everything checks out, let's get the 21 tax return as kind of like the last verification, and then we're good to go. And so what happened was the diligence and everything, like the deal was essentially done by late November, late November, early December. And then it was just like 3 months of literally waiting for the tax return. Like it was like everything was like set and done. And so I think it's helpful to know that there is a path to get to close kind of faster growing businesses with SBA loans. I will caution people though that just because you see a fast growing business doesn't mean that it's necessarily going the direction that our business ended up going. Like there's a lot of small businesses that have one good year, and we've seen plenty of those since, even in our space that we've walked away from. So it's more of like it's helpful to know that you can sometimes do something with an interim underwrite to get to close something that's growing quickly. But that doesn't, just because you can close a deal doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good one.
No, that's super interesting. And I guess with your diligencing, how did you guys get comfortable with that growth? Like, what did you guys look into or dig into during diligence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was two parts. It was one, like figuring out, was it just us growing? Was the overall market growing? I think it's always a big red flag if you're just taking a lot of market share, because you can only take share for so long. Eventually, you need the underlying market to grow. And so knowing that there was a lot of growth in the underlying market in general was helpful. I think talking to, kind of seeing some of the, West Coast businesses that had been in the exact same spot that we were in 5, 6 years earlier, and seeing like what their trajectory was helpful. And then I think even just the underlying performance, right? Like every month that they printed, we essentially got almost half a year of performance to see before closing, and seeing that the revenue level staying where it was and actually growing, what was super encouraging, right? It's a little bit of, it's still a risk, obviously, right? The music can stop at any time, but we just saw, we got super comfortable with the adoption rate. I mean, we did a back of the envelope estimate that I think it was like 1 in 100 homes in Dallas had turf at that point.
No,
And
wow.
so it was just like we saw strong referral rates, we saw obviously strong reviews. And so as it comes to kind of betting on a product and a trend, you see all the right metrics to kind of follow that. So I think it's always tricky with these small businesses to get the type of data that you would want to have, right? Ideally, I would want to be like, okay, show me every turf install that happened in Dallas. Show me every, which company did it. Give me all that over 10 years, and like, you're not going to get that level of data. Like you have a lot of people that are just like, well, I can't answer the question because I don't have the data. If you need that level of certainty, this isn't going to be for you because you're not going to get it. Like you're going to have to generally make a bet based on limited data that you have available. And so, the items that I walk through, that's what we spend time on. Obviously, we talk to customers a lot. We talk to even competitors and everything, and that's how we got comfortable in the end.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And were you just kind of calling up other business or other sort of artificial turf business owners in the West Coast and in the area, or
Yeah, so it was some of that. It was like some of our investors had gotten turf, so we asked them, how did you guys pick? What was your experience? We called everyone else to give us quotes. We had folks that live in the area and say, let's see how fast do people respond? Like, where are we pricing wise? So I think just like figuring out where you are in like your kind of local competition matrix to a certain degree. And then, just yeah, like seeing like I went to San Diego. This was kind of a mix of business and personal, but just like walked around a couple of neighborhoods and just looked at like how many yards did I see that had turf in them. And I was like, probably at like 20 to 40%. And I'm like, man, there's so much room here, right, to get to this. And it's not that climate wise we're that different in terms of like how much rainfall there is and stuff like that. If anything, it's harder to grow grass in Dallas than it is in California. And so just like seeing, it was like just like all the findings kind of pointed in the same direction. There wasn't really one where it was like, hey, this product isn't a fit for this area for some reason or anything like that. So that's what we did. And I mean, again, I think at the end of all of that, it's still a bet, right? It's still, you kind of put your money where your mouth is and put all the chips in the middle at some point, and either you do it or you don't.
yeah, I know that makes sense. I guess I'm curious, going to structuring the deal, did you guys structure the deal in any sort of creative way to de-risk yourself from that growth, or how did you guys go about structuring the deal?
Yeah, we had a pretty meaningful forgivable seller note. So that was kind of our way back home if like 21 was just like incredibly good year. I think generally any way that you can get contingency from the seller, I think nowadays the SBA guidelines have changed a little bit, so you can actually, do more creative stuff there. At our point, obviously, traditionally you would want it just to be an earn out, but obviously you can't do that with, or couldn't at least at that point in time, do it with SBA. I don't know exactly where the rules are right now. I think it's still no earn out, right?
I don't
But
know or out.
yeah. But yeah, any type of contingency, whether that's escrow, whether that's forgivable seller note, the seller will always know way more about the business and the industry than you will, and especially them not willing to hold a meaningful seller note or contingency is a pretty big red flag. So that was the biggest way for us to de-risk some of it, where and that was one part. And then I think the other part that was interesting was we gave them two options, which also gives you a good amount of information. So we gave them one option, which was, I'll give you a smaller seller node, but it's going to be an all or nothing forgivable if we don't hit last year's numbers. Or I'll give you a larger seller node and I'll give you kind of like a stagger where it's like if you hit 90% of revenue, 80% of 70% of revenue, so on and so forth. And so to me, what was interesting there was, depending on what you pick, tells me a lot about where you think the business is actually going, right? Like if you're confident in where the business is going, you would rather take the smaller seller node and the all or nothing because you're so confident that it's going to happen. And so that was an interesting little exercise for us, where like we were happy with both options, but it you got more of the information that this only the seller has based on what they pick.
No, that's super smart. And you guys tied the forgivable seller note to revenue basically from the prior year. Is that how you guys structured it, or did you guys tie it to anything
Yep.
else? Got it.
No, we did that. I think you got to be careful with like structuring too complicated of things because a lot of times like sellers are typically good operators, but this is their first like M&A deal. And so you don't want them to get the feeling of like, oh, you're trying to structure something so complicated that you're trying to screw me over. And frankly, it shouldn't be I mean, ideally you'd want to tie it to cash flow or EBITDA, but then like you can mess around with that. And so it's just like try to get 80-90% of the coverage, right? In terms of like if we're doing the same revenue as last year, we're probably in a decent spot.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why we ended up doing revenue. I mean, obviously the further down the P&L you can go, the better for you. But it becomes one where probably makes the seller as comfortable. So it's always like a balance between managing the relationship with the seller and achieving the protection that you're looking for.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And no, I see that a lot too. I'm curious with, I guess, the transition. How long did the seller stay involved for? What did that look like for you guys? How long did it take for you guys to actually learn the business?
Yeah, good question. So
And if there's anything unexpected, I guess, during that period, I'm curious.
yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. I think what we got really lucky with is we bought a business that had a general manager in place, which I think is a very fundamental difference and one that we only realized fully after the fact. Like I think the first 2 years of owning a small business look fundamentally different if the seller was the main operator or if there is some level of management in the company already. And so for us, the sellers were like, we're pretty much not involved. The GM is running the business, and we're like, sure, like everyone, like that's what you're trained to say. But we literally started the transition day one. And it was like, well, what's the QuickBooks log? And it's like, no idea. Like it was literally a day of the seller sitting in the office and pretty much being like, gotta ask the GM or gotta ask the office manager. I don't know. So we had like a 6 months transition planned, and then it was pretty much after one day, it was like, we'll call you if you need you. Like this, you weren't, yeah, you weren't kidding about these guys are running the business. And so that helped us like pretty quickly to be able to work on expansion, professionalization, and some more strategic stuff, rather than having to go in and manage crews day to day and look over quotes day to day and stuff like that. So I think in that regard, pretty happy with the transition. Couldn't really go any better in that regard. Um, I think there's always some surprises, right? Like we had something where they had leased vehicles. We were going to take over the leased vehicles, and Ford was just like, "No, we won't. We're not going to do that." So all of a sudden, we had to buy out, 3 or 4 extra trucks that we hadn't budgeted for, and stuff like that. So there's always little hiccups like that. But overall, we got pretty lucky in the transition department for sure.
Yeah, no, it sounds like the dream, a GM in place, an owner that truly was pretty absentee. And, I feel like you see that in the marketing language and it's never the reality. So that's amazing that it was the reality for you guys.
Yeah, for once, it actually played out that way.
I mean, look, you guys, you mentioned you guys, tripled the business, grew the business a ton. When did you start? What were some of the big initiatives you guys focused on in the past couple years that really drove some of the growth? Or was it, obviously the market's growing as a whole too, but I'm sure you guys, did some things as well.
I would hope so. No, I mean, I think that we spent the first year really focused on like creating a business that's scalable. So, it's the little things like we were scheduling on a whiteboard. We were literally going to just run out of room on the whiteboard. There was a lot of we had data in 5 6 different places. You had QuickBooks somewhere, and then you had an email here or there, and then you had maybe some drawing system. And so anytime someone would call in or we had to check a job, it was like, we'll check that folder or this file or this file. And so our first goal was to obviously not disrupt things. We didn't do this until kind of 6 months in or so. Um, but to create an operating system that could scale, where whether we did one job, 10 jobs, or 100 jobs, you can use the same process. So that was one of the big efforts in year one. I think
Was it hard to get the team on board in terms of training them up to actually leverage these new systems that I guess were more efficient for you guys?
Yeah, so I think it was one of those where we spend a lot of time trying to mimic what they were currently doing with a software system, to the point where we had to build out a custom schedule view or something like that. And I think there's definitely, I mean, I don't think anyone's ever excited about having to change the systems they use in their job. I think that's like a very natural thing, even if it is efficient in the long run. I think it's always like, you get better at your job, you do things a certain way, and anytime someone tells you to do it differently, it's always, a disruption at first. So we actually like set aside like 2 months in like the fall of 22 to just be tech support, and surprisingly did surprisingly little. So I think it was initially certainly something where I don't think that, everyone was just like excited and going home telling their wife that like woohoo, like we're getting a new software system. But 6 months in, and people are like, oh, I get it now, right? It's like they're out in the car, like between appointments, like, oh, I can pull, like this person just called me, and on my phone I can pull up everything I need to know about this job. So I think it matters a lot to not like, like we were in conversation with everyone this whole time as we were like deciding between different options. So making sure that it is supposed to be easier for them as well. And then I think the other part is like, making sure that yes, understanding, yes, this is a disruption. Don't walk in and be like, we're using Salesforce, this is better, like you're just gonna have to learn it. But like, hey, understand that this is a change, like we promise you this is, it's going to help in the long run. Here's the different factors why we're doing what we're doing. And if you have any questions, like you can call me at 10 at night if you're having troubles with it, because I'm making you switch it. And so I think that like both being willing to like go through the change with them, and setting it up in a way where like it is as little disruption as possible, I think is important when you do something like that. Um, but I think that's the big thing. I think, in terms of initiatives overall, is like I think out the gate, people oftentimes get into these businesses and try to just use whatever skills they have. So it's like if you're like, oh, let's do a new website. This website looks old. Let's do this and this. And I think that's, you got to get away from that mindset. Like we had a website that wasn't super new, and talked to one of our investors who has expertise in that space. He's like, do not mess with it. You don't know right now, at least you don't know why it's working, why it's ranking where it's ranking. And like let's give it some time and figure out where we're good, where we're bad, and before changing anything. And so I think that the biggest thing that people should do right out the gate is like obviously, build a relationship with all the employees, figure out what you can do to make their lives easier. And then the second one is get money in the door. Like your job is to get money in the door. Start like all the other stuff, the like strategic stuff, changing operating systems, whatnot. You can do that when you're 8, 9, 10 months in. You have some cash in the bank, and you didn't lose all your employees. Okay, at that point you can start changing some stuff. But the first 6 months should just be see where you can help, and do whatever you can to get revenue in the door.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like, do no harm the first 6 months and just do what they were doing well. I guess after the first 6 months to a year, what were some of the other initiatives you started then focusing on?
Yes, I mean, I think that's kind of when the expansion plan came to be, right? I mean, we obviously looked at multi-location from the beginning. Like that was in the even in the first teasers and everything. And so it was once we had the blueprint from Dallas, we started working on opening Austin, which was the first expansion location. So we did that in early 2023. And then that was a whole learning experience, obviously, right? It's like now you have a different market, some different operating you know situations where maybe your suppliers look different, maybe deliveries look different, right? So figuring all that out, we spend a lot of time like boots on the ground, my business partner and I, to like really learn what does it look like. I think in general, you can never outsource the key functions of your business, and I think that's an important kind of exercise for people to go through. Is like what are you making, like why is this business making money, like what is the key competence that this business has, right? And so in our case, it's obviously lead generation, sales, and then installation. And so to a certain degree, when you buy a company, you don't really know why things are going, like if things are going well, why things are going well, like who you don't know every last thing that every person in your company does. And so obviously you should try to understand that as much as possible. And then for us going to a new market, it was all about, well, like we should be the ones on the ground, right? Like you can't hire someone to open a new location for you and just run all of this. You have to kind of like learn that, like grow that muscle. And then eventually, once you have it all figured out and you've maybe opened one or two locations, then you can hire someone to kind of, execute on established process. But I think in general, as a small business owner, anytime you do new product, you do a new location, you do any type of expansion, you're you're going to have to be on the front lines. Like you have to figure it out with the business, and then you can maybe hand it over to someone. So, but yeah,
No, that's
since pretty much after year one, it's all been focused on location. So 23, we opened Austin, kind of learned our lessons there, figured all of that out. And then going into 24 was pretty much um, let's start ramping up the new location effort. So we hired someone to run lead for us on new locations so we can open multiple a year. And then we focus when we started looking at add-ons. So we bought our first add-on in Utah in early 24, and then we've opened Atlanta and Nashville as well. So now it's becoming more of like a let's open multiple locations a year and ideally do some add-ons.
I'm really curious, what are sort of some of the pros and cons behind growth through acquisition through the add-ons you're talking about versus, opening up a new location from scratch? Like what makes you guys decide to go one way or the other?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the market and who you can buy. It's if you can buy an established business, you can kind of fast forward the first, kind of skip the first 3, 4, 5 years. It's just in any given market, if you start from scratch, you have to build reputation from zero. You have to build institutional knowledge of how do we do things. There's no established base there, so obviously wherever we can, where we can find companies that operate similar to us and have potential, it makes sense to buy and kind of skip the first couple of years. But then there's also just a lot of markets where those players simply don't exist and they're good markets. And so then the only option you have is to open there and kind of build uh, the knowledge base in terms of sales, installation, the whole process.
No, that makes sense. And when you're talking about, good markets, like how are you determining that for these new markets you guys are expanding into?
Yeah, I think that's part of we obviously built a lot of like tracking capabilities over the first year and a half to the point where now we can look at what are search volumes, what are ad costs, what are conversion rates, all this. I mean, it's not rocket science. Like everyone kind of knows where, if you want to get something done around your house, you're probably gonna like Google it. Like it's not that hard to figure out. But I think it's meaningful to know, how many leads do you need to feed a crew for an entire year? How many, what's a decent conversion rate? What's a bad one? When is it an issue with the leads? When is it an issue with the sales rep? All those types of factors. So we generally look at the size of the population size, average incomes, like a competitive landscape, like who's already there, and then search volumes, just a variety of metrics that effectively lets us know is like, does this mirror any of the markets that we're in, where we think it's an attractive geography or not.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess I'm curious, fast forward a couple years now, what does your role look like today? You and your partners, I guess.
Yeah, so we're technically CEO and president, but I think the titles don't really mean anything in a small business. I think our focus is really on the building the corporate support for a national turf installation company. That's our goal. Is we want to be a national installation company. That means we're probably always going to run point on M&A to a certain degree, just because that's our background, and frankly, that's the exciting side of growing businesses. And then obviously building kind of the shared service center to support, 10, 15 locations plus, building, same thing that we built a scalable blueprint for an individual location. And now it's about building kind of a corporate and shared service function to have a blueprint that can scale to, 10, 50, whatever, however many locations. And so like we think that those are like the two core kind of functions that we have to fulfill, and then wherever we find good folks to lead, kind of specific areas, new locations, operations, stuff like that, that's what we hire for.
That makes sense. And definitely, I think it's still good to have something that you're excited about that you're working on all the time. So love hearing that. I guess we're close to time, but any sort of final words of wisdom, especially for those first-time business buyers out there, based on your experience the past couple of years going down this path?
Um, I'd say we haven't touched on this side, but I think choosing your investors wisely matters more than I thought going in. I think we were in the lucky position where we were, pretty oversubscribed for the money that we're raising, so we had the luxury of picking our investors, and they've been very instrumental in how the business has done. And it's something where you want to optimize for folks that, industry experience in whatever the core function of your business is. So we had folks that a little bit of industry experience, a lot of like sales and marketing experience, and then we had some folks that had former search operators, which I think is just helpful from a psychological perspective, right? Of going through the transition, like signing a big personal guarantee. And so I think it's as the market is becoming more mature, like the search market itself, where it's becoming easier to reach, a lot of investors. It's easier to reach a lot of service providers. You can obviously always optimize for, keeping every last 0.5% or percent of equity in your deal. I've started to see the difference there where deals go bad, and experienced investors could have like helped you prevent that. Like I've had a situation where a searcher called me and was like, I mean, it literally is going to bankruptcy. And what happened is like there was a clause in the seller note that was a default confession of judgment if the seller note interest wasn't paid. And they had another covenant in the bank loan where like if there wasn't enough cash in the business, he wasn't allowed to pay the seller note interest, and the seller went crazy and just like froze the bank, like took over the bank accounts, and like
Wow.
completely irrational. Like I think that's one of those things where it's like uh you structure everything for a day where someone is irrational, right? Like you structure for the worst, you hope for the best. And so I think it's like items like that. It's items like, do I have enough working capital in the business? Am I putting too much cash on the business? Like I've had several times where I think I've mentioned we've invested in 7, 8 or so of these deals by now, where the deal looked quite a bit different at the end of the conversation that I've had with the searcher than it did in the beginning. And a lot of times it's better for both parties. Like we've had situations where you probably don't need that much cash up. You don't need a year of debt service up front, and you can probably keep the same amount of equity and give people a better step up if we, instead of putting 1 million of cash on the balance sheet, maybe we do 700 grand, and we get a little bit more of a line of credit from the bank, stuff like that. So I think for us, it's been super helpful for us to have high quality investors, and we try to do the same in all the deals that we're in.
No, that's great advice. Johannes, thank you so much for your time today. This is incredibly helpful. I guess, final question is if people want to reach out, where can they find you? What's the best way to contact you?
Probably Twitter or email. I'm on Twitter at Hock Johannes, I think. And then my email is johannes.hock@silvanocapital.com. Those are typically the two easiest ones to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate your time today. And I know people are going to really enjoy this and we'll learn a lot.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate the invite, and happy to chat whenever.